Andy Nowicki, your right-wing English teacher. I was contemplating the scene between Hamlet and Ophelia in Act 3, Scene 1, in which Hamlet addresses Ophelia and says, first of all, if she's honest, then asks if she's fair, and then she asks, what does he mean by this? Why is he asking her these questions? And he answers her something to the effect of, I don't know if this is verbatim, but if you're honest and fair, then your honesty should have no discourse with your beauty. And Ophelia objects and says, well, shouldn't beauty and honesty be in discourse with one another? Can there be any better combination of qualities than honesty and beauty or fairness? And Hamlet says, no, absolutely not. In fact, that if this is sort of like the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing, that this is how one who is beautiful maintains her innocence, that if she becomes aware of her beauty in a way that is self-conscious and becomes aware of the corruptive power of her beauty, then it has a very corruptive effect on her own soul. And I say her because he's of course talking to Ophelia, and I think he's talking generally about women there. So Hamlet maintains very strongly that that in order to maintain one's innocence, one has to remain unaware or be in sort of willing or willful ignorance of one's beauty, to just hold it in suspension. You can be aware of it, but just pay it no heed, pay it no mind, give it no status in your mind. He says that honesty will be transformed into a bawd, into it's essentially a whore, a gross, corrupted thing, sooner than innocence will transform beauty into its likeness. Okay, so this is Hamlet's take on innocence and beauty. Now, Sir Lord Byron had a very different take, and I'll just read all of the poem here. It's not long. It's just 3 stanzas long. It's a moving poem. It's a poem that I find to be particularly compelling in its way. But I wonder if what it maintains as truth is really true. Certainly Hamlet would say that it isn't. But it makes a very persuasive case. Well, I shouldn't say it makes a persuasive case, because it's not really arguing for anything. It's rendering this personality, this soul, in a way that is compelling and moving to the reader. But as I said, very much in tension with what Hamlet maintains about beauty in Act 3, Scene 1. So the poem is She Walks in Beauty by Lord Byron. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace, which waves in every raven tress, or softly lightens o'er her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. And on that cheek and o'er that brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent, the smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. All right. So this text is interesting for many reasons. It's interesting biographically speaking. I don't tend to like to read biographically because, you know, a writer's work is one thing and his life is a different thing. His life is still can be an interesting thing to study, but we shouldn't limit a writer's work to trying to understand his biography, because, of course, the best writers transcend their own biography and simply write about human truth, generally speaking. And of course, there is an understanding of the young woman that this poem was supposedly about, which I won't go into much detail here because I've forgotten. That's part of the reason why, and also because I don't really want to get hung up on the historical details, the alleged historical details, interesting though they may be. But I think what's interesting to note here are a couple of things. First of all, just to talk about biography for another moment, Byron was well known for being a womanizer. He was not what I would consider to be a terribly moral man. He was, you know, what one might term in a different time a scoundrel or a cad. But what's interesting here is this is not a poem that you would expect to be written by a cad or by a womanizer or by a sensualist or any other such person. This is a poem written by a man who sees in a woman's beauty the beauty of her innocence, which is the true beauty that comes through in the poem. And again, this is very much in tension with Hamlet's assertions about how beauty and virtue should keep themselves in their separate spheres, or rather that virtue in a woman particularly, it could be a man too, but he's talking particularly in a woman, should have no discourse with, should have nothing to do with her beauty. But here, Byron is sort of taking Ophelia's side. First, in saying that in fact beauty and virtue and innocence dwell together harmoniously. In fact, there is no greater harmony than beauty and innocence. And you know, one could almost read this theologically, I think, because surely, you know, the Virgin Mary, if you believe in the Blessed Virgin Mary, or the beauty, you know, she's surely a beautiful woman. She's always described that way by seers, by mystics. In, you know, Dante's Divine Comedy, Beatrice comes in, and also in his other work, Beatrice, his muse, I should say, appears as an emblem of beauty, but also of virtue. And in those cases, the beauty and the innocence or virtue seem to be very much in harmony with one another. And it makes sense that in heaven, beauty and virtue would be in harmony. That would be the highest. That would be the highest expression of each. That one's virtue or innocence would magnify one's beauty, and vice versa. One's beauty would magnify one's innocence. So he begins the poem, Byron does, by describing the woman in question and how she walks in beauty. And he talks about how her beauty is a combination of everything that's dark and bright, all the best of dark and bright. And this golden mean in this case, the mean between the bright and the dark, is this kind of perfection that he describes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. So the brightness of the day is gaudy. It's too bright. But of course, darkness is too dark. But in her beauty, we see a kind of this tender light that is mellowed. It's mellowed the light of the day and tempered the darkness of the night. And then he goes on in the second stanza to say, one shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace. So this is again the perfection of the beauty that he's describing. If it had been just a shade darker, or just a touch, a ray brighter, the beauty wouldn't be there. But again, the beauty is like a golden mean between the darkness and the light. Almost Aristotelian there, and it's his depiction of the golden mean as the essence of virtue, the essence of perfection, in this case the essence of beauty. And it's in that second verse he begins to talk about how her thoughts are serenely sweet, and the dwelling place of her thoughts, her mind, her soul, are pure and dear. So again, this begins to bring in the discussion of this woman's character, her innocence, her goodness. Innocence, not in the sense of that we often think of innocence as like, I don't know, inexperience or ignorance, or somebody who doesn't know about the world. The kind of dismissive way that a lot of people talk about innocence today, which testifies to, I think, the wretchedness, the true corruption of our times. He doesn't mean that by here in talking about her innocence, although he doesn't say the word innocence yet. But in stanza 3, he talks more about the expressions that come over her face, the thoughts that are sweet, that tell of days in goodness spent. Okay, this is not what we would think to hear of from a cad, like we think that, like apparently Byron was praising a woman. A cad who praises a woman would dwell on sensual aspects of the woman's beauty. But here he goes from describing her beauty as this golden mean between darkness and light. He goes from that point to discussing her thoughts being pure and the dwelling place of her thoughts, her mind, being dear and pure. And then the final stanza talks of how her days are spent in goodness, and it characterizes her mindset as a mind at peace with all below. Interesting, the word below, almost as if it's elevating her to this kind of Beatrician status, like Dante would say Beatrice, or we might, again, how mystics would talk about the Blessed Virgin Mary being above the world, but seeing it and taking it in and being at peace with it all. And finally, a heart whose love is innocent. Okay, and the final word of this poem is innocent. And here, innocent is not, does not take on this kind of dismissive, derisive kind of connotation that it often has, as I said before, in our day and times. And as you would think that a man like Byron, cad that he was, apparently, you would think he would have no interest in this kind of innocence. But the thing is, innocence moves us all. It moves the hardest hearted of men, and the most sensually perverted of cads, true innocence, true goodness, true beauty and goodness in one form cannot help but move our hearts, because it is what we were created to be. I will venture to say. Here, this is the reason why some people might disagree with me, and that's fine, but this is my take on it. We were created to be good, to embody this kind of beauty, and this beauty in innocence, this peace of mind in virtue and godliness. Although this poem doesn't talk about God at all, doesn't talk about religion at all, but it does hint that beauty finds its highest expression, its highest form in innocence and purity. And it does so in a way that doesn't read, I mean, it certainly doesn't read as caddish, but it also doesn't come across as prudish or puritanical. It comes across as someone who appreciates beauty for the proper reasons. And that's why I think it's a very moving poem. Thanks for watching. Aidan Nowicki, your right-wing English teacher, signing off.